Hey, JohnsonBoss here with another episode of Breaking Glad. And today we're talking about my favorite Gladiator beast Secutor, and how we can use him to just steal games, close games out, and really get just an absurd amount of value, I think, from such a little guy on the field. Now I know some people don't like running Secutor because there's the obvious drawback of if you draw him, he's a 400 vanilla monster. Can't tag, anything like that. That being said, I just think there's just so many ways to convert him. If even if you do draw him, you run 3 tigers, you have Rescue Cat if you get him on the field too. You contact constantly into Gazaris or Herc, and you can use him as material for that. Or sometimes it's just simply getting a Chariot live by having him face up on the field is all you need to kind of lock down a certain type of game. And so I just think the idea that just because he's a Garnet to draw is reason enough to not run him is just really, really flawed, because the chances, one, that you draw him aren't that great, and two, even against the decks where it's maybe a little bit less likely that he has a shot to resolve, those decks also tend to be the most meaningful decks to have him resolve against, and there's still plenty of shots to make that happen, and especially if you're thinking and planning for it, there's very much a good chance that you're going to be able to resolve a Secutor. So I just think, one, he should be main deck. Two, you should just never side him, is how I view the deck. I don't care what the matchup is. There's just way too much upside in having Secutor in the deck. So let's talk about what Secutor is and the core effect right away. So he's 400 beat stick. When he is already tagged in by the effect of a GB, so not just when you normal him like a lot of the GBs, he has to have been summoned by a different GB. At that point, if he attacks successfully, he can special summon 2 Gladiator Beast monsters from the deck to the field. This is unique in the sense that of all the GBs that we typically run, his effect is actually a mandatory effect. So you must activate this at the end of a battle phase if he has been tagged in. Meaning, really one key thing is that if there are no spaces on the field for the monsters he's summoning in, whether let's say there's already 5 monsters out there, or let's say there's 4 and there's no room for the second thing he summons, all of those GBs get sent directly to the graveyard. And it's a really important thing because there's actually a lot of ways to positively use that, which I'll talk about later in the video, but it's kind of confusing because most people just assume it's just like Dandelion, whereas if there's not room for 2, it's not able to activate. Also because Dandelion is mandatory, but because the difference of tokens being summoned and monsters being summoned, there's a home for monsters that can't be successfully summoned by game mechanic, and that is the graveyard. So Secutor will attempt to resolve as best it can, and if not, send extras to the graveyard. The only way that Secutor does not activate is if you do not have 2 eligible GBs in the deck to even summon in the first place, in which case the effect would not activate because of that condition. I don't think it's ever happened to me, but it's not technically impossible for that to happen in maybe a longer, grindier game. And so that's the core of Secutor. He summons 2, he stays on the field himself, he never gets tagged into the deck, he stays out there and just brings 2 to the field. And then those things have their effect as summoned by a GB to do whatever it is that they need to do at that moment. And so that's kind of the overview of how Secutor works. And what he does on the field. So now I want to talk about just some of the scenarios in which we can initially use Secutor and show you some examples of this in action. Probably the most common way that you're going to use Secutor or get a Secutor to resolve is we have Rescue Kit, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But let's just say we have any GB in our hand and a Test Tiger. We can summon that GB, Test Tiger, and shuffle it in and go get our Secutor from the deck. Whether that's the Secutor we already had in hand or it's in the deck, that's a really common way that you're going to activate a Secutor to be able to use. Now, obviously, that requires what we think is going to be an open chance to attack successfully so that we can, at the end of the battle phase, activate Secutor's effect to go ahead and summon 2 Gladiator Beasts. Fairly straightforward. I'm not going to get into a lot of the details in this example about like what we're tagging into, because we're just showing, hey, like we attack successfully directly, so we get 2 things out. Now, something that a lot of people will oftentimes talk about here is that Secutor is an instant Heraclinos if you get an attack off, which is accurate typically. So if you go Secutor attack, it's successful. You can get Laquari and anything else out, and all of a sudden, in just one attack, you have all the monsters that you need to make your Heraclinos, and that feels great, especially if we get a chariot behind it. And so while that is entirely true, it's not always the best move, even if you can make it, for really two reasons, in my opinion. One, if you don't have the chariot, then I'm not forcing Herc if I don't have a chariot, or maybe a compulse is like somewhat a monster effect protection, just because it gets really risky, especially if they have a lot of resources still. Certainly depends on matchup. Again, there's always nuances that I'm not going to try and get into in every single scenario here, but that is something to consider, is that while it can force into Herc, it's not necessarily what we want to do every single time. A second reason that I don't like forcing into Herc is that it does mean we're shuffling Secutor back in. And despite my opinion that we have to run Secutor for GBs to hit their ceiling, I don't want to draw it. And so if I already have a live Secutor on the board, I'm not all that motivated to put it back into the deck to give me a potential chance of drawing it. And so I would much rather say, let's say attack, summon a Bestiari and a Laquari at 2100. If there's plus, maybe make a Gazaris by that Bestiari, but probably just set either book Compulse plus the Chariot and end my turn. And so now I've got a Secutor threatening immediately that they have to address. If they don't address this, I'm going to get another 2 GB tags in, and all of a sudden the game is running away in my favor. They also have to address, in this circumstance, a Bestiari threatening a Gazaris immediately in main phase 1, and they have to do it through a Chariot and a Compulse on my field. So this is really, really threatening to them, and it really just took any Tiger plus a GB and an open shot to attack. So fairly frequent circumstance, I don't care what deck you're playing against, this is not that uncommon of a chance to be able to get a free direct attack. And we're not even talking if I have Heavy Storm, if I have Trap Stun, to be able to do it safely through back rows here. So that's just a simple version of Secutor resolving on the field, either making Herc if we want to, or just how we can use it to stay wide and really threaten a lot of things by keeping him directly on the board. Now, another way you're going to be able to threaten a Secutor right away is simply just in Rescue Cat. So if we have Rescue Cat, we know that means we get Sam Knight and a Tiger potentially. And that means we can instantly Tiger the Sam Knight and go into Secutor and attack and do whatever we want in terms of tagging again. Could be our own Herc or whatever we needed again at that moment. This is a little bit marginally better probably than if we do GB plus Tiger, because we only use one card to do it, and maybe that's easier to then justify going into Herc because we have a little bit better card advantage. Again, I personally am only doing that if it really makes sense and if I have Chariot to protect Herc. It's probably the biggest criteria, but there's other things to consider again as well. And so Rescue Cat is the other really common way of doing it. If you don't have Tiger plus GB, but you just have Cat alone is absolutely broken and crazy. We'll have a video on it later, but it is a way to get a lot of value really quickly out of Secutor. I mean, Secutor is honestly one of those things that makes Cat so broken, that access to be able to turn a single card into 3 monsters on field, with 2 of those monsters basically going +1 with whatever their effects are off of their own summoning. Now, another common option to get access to Secutor with some upside is if we have our Prisma Tiger combo. While most people kind of automatically think of Prisma Tiger as being our way into a Gazaris immediately, which is true, there's also a lot of ways to use Prisma. We'll talk about in another video, but in this one, we just want to highlight a way to use Secutor in a really positive way here to be able to punish an opponent and open strong if they give you an open chance to attack. So in this case, we are using 2 cards. We're dumping Laquari, and we're going into a Secutor here. We could jump SDR if we wanted to. It doesn't matter that much overall, but there is potential reasons to dump Laquari first here, depending on the scenario. So we attack with Secutor, and now Secutor is tagging out. Now we have a couple options. One, we could choose to Equest the Laquari that we dumped to get the draw to hand, and then potentially also go into Herc. Let's say this was in the deck. Or my preference here typically is to go into Darius, and if there's another plus available, great. If not, no big deal. But Darius and something else, get the Laquari back to hand, or rather, sorry, get the Laquari to the field with Darius effect, and then contact with those three, so the two that Secutor summoned out and the Herc, the Laquari that we dumped, to then make our end board, which now is with literally still 6 cards on board. We have Secutor live, Herc live, and in this case, we have really great protection to all but guarantee that we're probably going to get another effect out of Secutor next turn, and another attack, and then another 2 monsters to handle any situation any way that we need to. So just one of my favorite opens there, with all 6 cards still in play in terms of card advantage, but also 2 of the most powerful cards that exist in Edison in their own way, on board and live, ready to go as well. So another thing to talk about with Secutor is the fact that both of the monsters that Secutor summons out when its effect is resolving are coming out simultaneously. And what that means is it gives us an opportunity to chain block certain maybe tough to get around cards on the board that aren't as easy to get around. And I'm going to talk about a few examples here, and just starting with Titanial here on the board. We're going to go ahead and assume that, let's say we have a known Chariot down or something right now. Obviously, Titanial is capable of negating Tiger's target of the GB effect by attributing one of these tokens. For whatever reason, maybe they know we have a Chariot down, or they choose not to. We're going to go ahead and just say in this scenario, they didn't stop this Tiger target effect. We also could just already have Secutor on board and not have to do this targeting, but just showing it as an example here. So we Tiger Secutor or any GB to get this live so that Secutor now has his effect. And then we're able to go into our battle phase, attack a token. This token now is going to go away. So at the end of the battle phase, we're then going to be able to activate Secutor's effect and bring in 2 monsters to the field. Now the key thing here with chain blocking is understanding that we need 2 activated effects to hit the field to be able to build the chain in a way that our opponent is not going to be able to chain Titanial to what we do. And we also have to make sure that essentially the Titanial is not able to chain to the second thing, which potentially is something to consider if we're going like Bestiari, Murmillo, or something, or if we had like double Murmillo or something like that. In this case, the most common thing you're going to do is you're going to get Murmillo, and in our circumstance here, our most likely solution would be getting a Gladiator. And so what happens is we summon these 2 out, and then we build a new chain because both of these effects activate when they're special summoned by a GB. The way that chains get built, and this is more of a generic Yu-Gi-Oh thing, in Edison specifically, than anything else, is mandatory effects always need to get put into a chain first, and then optional effects can be put into a chain. And so the reason that it's really easy to get Murmillo to be chain blocked and able to kill things like Titanial in this case is that Murmillo is mandatory. So we say chainlink 1 Murmillo, target our Titanial. Chainlink 2, let's go Gladiator here, target our Dandelion. And so the way it would resolve in reverse is Gladiator banishes the Dandelion, Murmillo kills Titanial. And because Titanial can't directly chain to Murmillo's targeting effect, Titanial can't activate at all. And so Titanial would end up just being destroyed, and we would end with this end state in that type of a scenario. Okay, so let's talk about another potential scenario here. Let's assume we have a live Secutor. For whatever reason, it got live on the board. And what we have is Secutor going into battle against this board. It goes ahead and attacks, destroys a token like before. But in this circumstance, there's a set card on the field along with the Titanial, and we really want to kind of take care of this set card. And there's a good chance it's a Raikou. And so we were like, well, how do we take care of this Raikou while also not being chain blocked by, or not being killed by Titanial in the process? And so what we can do in this circumstance, this is getting into some nicheness on mandatory activated effects again, is we could go into Murmillo and Bestiari, even though there's no spell or trap on the field. because bestiary is a mandatory effect, it is still going to activate and be put into the chain. So even in this circumstance without a target, we could go Murmillo chainlink 1, target Titanial, bestiary chainlink 2 is activated, there's no target. Titanial is still chain blocked from chaining to Murmillo, so Titanial gets destroyed at resolution of this chain. And then in our main phase 2, we could contact those two into Gazaris and go ahead and pop both of these cards right here, which in our circumstance, it was a Raikou. It's not always what you're going to do there, but that's a really good example of just how you could still use some of the other effects of GBs to chain block, especially the mandatory ones, even if there's not a target. And so your 3 mandatory GB effects are Bestiary, Murmillo, and Equesti. So you could also have, for some reason, if you had Equesti and you wanted to bring it out, even if you didn't have a GB target in Graveyard, you could still bring Equesti out to be able to chain block Titanial there and prevent its ability to chain to that effect and stop it from killing, in that case, our Murmillo. So Titanial is a really common example, but we have a couple other fairly frequent examples, and the most common one is definitely going to be Stardust. So they can be in a similar scenario where they've got a Stardust on field. Let's again say we just tigered our Secutor to get it live because we can't like just Murmillo the Stardust, so we got to do something else to it. And we really need to push this turn. Obviously, we could just like set Compulse Pass here, but we're just using this example. What we could do then is go directly into battle after getting our Secutor out. We can attack our Stardust. Let's say they potentially have back row here, so we could get through attack deck first, and then in the battle step, we can declare our Book of Moon, target our Stardust. Stardust then gets set, and then in the damage step gets flipped face up. We would take 1600 damage here, but again, we're now in a scenario where at the end of the battle phase, our Secutor can be summoning 2 simultaneously, and again, we can get the same scenario of, let's say, Murmillo and Bestiary here, make Murmillo chainlink 1, targeting our Stardust, and then make Bestiary chainlink 2. Now, it's really important to note that we couldn't chain block Stardust successfully if Bestiary had a target on the field right now, because Stardust could then just chain to Bestiary's effect and then save itself from being killed by Murmillo. But in this case, we have an empty field with no back rows on either side of the field, so we can still chain block our Stardust with Bestiary. Let's say we did already have something set right here. We're going to say not Compulse, because obviously Compulse makes too easy of an out to Stardust here for our example. But what we could do instead is go ahead and say Murmillo chainlink 1 and Ready Ari chainlink 2, and Ready Ari banish something. Now we get Ready Ari value, we get Murmillo value, and we get rid of our Stardust that we have here. So that's another really common way to out probably 2 of the most challenging cards versus GBs in Amaryllis and Stardust. If they get on the field, how to beat them can be a little bit annoying sometimes for us because we don't really easily get a way to attack over them ever. And if we're getting into Herc, chances are there's another way to get over these monsters in the meantime as well. So now let's talk about another example with Secutor and chain blocking, where we're not trying to chain block Murmillo so that something can't respond to Murmillo as chainlink 2 in the chain building, but also on the back end where we're trying to chain block something so that it doesn't have a chance to resolve and misses timing. And a really common example that we have for this is like a dupe frog lock. And so in this case, what we're going to say is we have 2 dupe frogs on board. Let's say it's verse frogs. They have like a fairly depleted hand. We just gave them no cards for now. And we really want to deplete them and deprive them of as many resources as we really can here. And so a way that we can do that is activating our Tiger to get our Secutor live here. Again, any GB works here. We go ahead and have to book one of our dupes on the field so that we're able to attack. So we book that dupe. And then we go into battle, we attack this dupe frog. We do have to take 1600 life points of damage then. Oh. And then we activate Secutor's effect. Now the most important thing to know here is that, like we talked a little bit earlier, mandatory effects will always be first in the chain. So if we're trying to force Murmillo to be chain link 2, we can only use another mandatory effect to actually get that value of chain blocking here. So in this case, we're going to say Bestiari is the one we select so that we can also destroy our second Dupe Frog on the board here. So Bestiari doesn't have a target in this case, but is still able to activate. And chain link 2, we Murmillo hit the Dupe Frog that we have on board here. So that Dupe Frog gets killed and is not able to activate because it misses timing, since the next thing to happen is the resolution of the first chain link, as opposed to him able to have an open state to search and add with dupe. So then in this type of a scenario, we might decide, hey, we're going to go ahead and contact into Gazaris to destroy the second Dupe Frog on the board. And he will be able to search with this one because it's chain link 1. However, we did deprive him of one of the 2 cards that he probably needs to come back. And so a single swap frog or unifrog is usually not going to kill us. It's usually when they get a couple options that they're able to start doing some damage to us. So that's just kind of rounding out the ways that you can really use Secutor strategically, not just because you get extra monsters, but because you're able to create chain block scenarios to give us outs to boards that maybe are annoying or difficult to get through in any other way. Last important note on chain blocks is the real key thing there is the fact it's this simultaneous summon again. And another way to get chain blocks that we can talk about in another video is when Gazaris tags out for 2, Gazaris also brings 2 monsters out and can get the same types of chain blocking effects that Secutor gets. Caveat being, Gazaris can't get Bestiari in the process, so there's just a little bit of a different quirk about using Gazaris for those upsides. And so now I want to talk about another example with Secutor that makes Secutor really broken, and one of the reasons that there's actually so many scenarios in which Secutor has a chance to resolve in Edison is because of all the set monsters that happen, the flip effect monsters that happen, especially in games 1 and games 2 that they might side them out sometimes, but they're still there, and Raikos in particular are still very frequent in the meta. In this case, let's say they have a set Raiko on board and we have NEGB and Tiger in hand. The key thing here is we have Gladiator Beast War Chariot. It lets us confidently attack Secutor into face downs without caring about what that face down effect is on the back end. And so we can Tiger our Secutor to get live and then go directly into battle phase. And we don't care if it's Raiko that can destroy anything because we can just pop it. And that's true of basically everything that gets set in Edison. So whether this is a Snowman Eater, a Fossil Dyna, anything like that all have activated effects. That means we can chariot that activated effect and then immediately tag out. So in this example, again, we're going to say we attacked a Raiko. Raiko gets flipped up in substep 2 of damage step. Then we go through damage calc in substep 4. Damage calc, to be clear, is what has to occur to allow a Gladiator Beast to tag or activate their end of battle phase effects. And so 95% of the time, that's not something to really care about. If there's a battle, then it just happens. In this case, we have Secutor attacking our Raiko. We go through damage calc. Secutor is going to destroy Raiko in the substep 6. Raiko activates, and we just go ahead and say, okay, well, Gladiator Beast War Chariot, that activated effect. So Raiko will be destroyed, and because we got through damage calc, even though Chariot was what destroyed the Raiko in the process, because that flip effect activation is after damage calculation, Secutor's condition has happened, so we're able to just activate Secutor, immediately get back that Chariot that we had, and then get anything else that we need to the field on top of that. So we could go grab this Chariot, end the board in 3 wide here, or make a Herc if we needed to as well. So that ability to really not care about set monsters because of Chariot is another thing that unlocks Secutor's potential a lot, because we're able to just approach any board confidently regardless of their set monster effect, because we can Chariot it along the way. Next, I want to talk about the tag orders, specifically when Secutor is in play. And I'll have a whole different video getting into like maybe more of the nitty-gritty details on tagging order and how to think about that, as well as battle and attack order, which can matter as well. But in this case, I just want to talk about why Secutor is really valuable to think about in terms of tag order. And that's because of its effect when the field is loaded, the extra GBs go to the graveyard. So in most game states, if we have a chance for Secutor to be tagging out with only one monster zone available, or rather to be tagging with only one monster zone available, we want to try and create that condition because it means we can immediately get a +1 to our hand. And so usually the most common thing that I'm doing there is a quest and like a bestiary so that I can summon a quest to the field, a quest can target that bestiary to my hand, and I'm immediately a +1 in the process. So that's probably the most common thing that I'm trying to do in this scenario. Another fairly common setup is a board that you see here with Secutor and Gazaris on the field. And so let's say they both attacked successfully, we want to tag out. A lot of people, I think, mistakenly tag Secutor first here, or they don't tag into Darius with our Gazaris. And both of those would be mistakes in this scenario. We're ignoring maybe like ready Ari targets that are important by opponent right now. So what we really want to do here, again, is create as many plus opportunities as we can get. And the way that we can do that is if we Gazaris tag first, and Gazaris just goes for Darius and a quest, Darius can target this Laquari that's hanging out in the graveyard, give us an extra monster, and a quest can get the War Chariot that's in the graveyard. And now we're 4 wide, and Secutor still has to activate. So we can now activate Secutor, and again, Secutor by game mechanic is going to come in 2, and if there's no room, they actually go to the graveyard. So we get to choose which extras go to the graveyard and which go to the field. And so in this case, we're going to say, okay, we'll get our second Equesti, but Bestiar has to get buried to the graveyard. And this is a simultaneous occurrence. So as soon as the monsters try to be on the field, if there is no space, they then are immediately in the graveyard. And what that means is we can Equesti the very thing that we just sent with our Secutor. So in this case, we sent Bestiari and are able to Equesti target immediately from the field. Now, our most likely end state in this type of a scenario is going to be that we're going to end up making a Heraclenios. And because we're making Heraclenios, what we did by adding the Bestiari to hand was also very valuable because it gives us another discard to do whatever we need to do in the gate with Heraclenios. And so it's a really important example of how to get the most out of your tags when it comes to Secutor specifically because of Secutor's effect to be able to give yourself basically just a free search of any GB monster in the deck whenever you just have one specific monster zone for it. Again, there's a lot of nuance when it comes to tags and some of the orders in which you might want to do things. But just in this video, I want to talk about Secutor specifically and an example like that so you could think about when you're really trying to time Secutor in the process. So the final thing I want to talk about is more of a nuanced decision-making process and not something I can tell you definitively here in a video. Here's always when to do this, or here's always when not to. But it's that decision of leaving Secutor on field or bringing him off the field by contacting with to make a Gazaris or a Heraclenios, let's say. And so for this example, let's also bring out a Laquari just to show that we kind of have a couple options here. We can make a Gazaris, we can make Heraclenios, and get Secutor off the board. So I think there's a couple things to think about. I mentioned earlier that Secutor in the deck is the worst draw in the deck, and we know that. So by keeping Secutor not in the deck, we're, in theory, in a very minor way, making sure that our draw is a little bit potentially better than if not. But also, we're just threatening a significant amount of extra value by keeping Secutor on the board at all times. So it's something to strongly consider when we have the right support cards, especially around it, to facilitate that. In this case, I want to basically talk about some of the cards that are going to give you some confidence on keeping Secutor out. Wabaku is a very obvious example because if they attack the Secutor, you just chain Wabaku, and all of a sudden, in the middle of their turn, you're getting 2 new GBs to the field while also destroying stuff on their field in the middle of their turn, or removing things from the graveyard, or getting free things from yours. It's pretty crazy to do that. And so oftentimes, if you do have a Wabaku, it's not a terrible idea to go ahead and keep a Secutor out on board. Maybe not alone if you don't know their cards well, that you don't know that they can't do something else to get rid of it. But if you got a few different options here, you could easily keep one on board with a Wabaku in play. The other options that are really common here, if you have like a Compulse, or specifically a Book of Moon, or obviously any of our battle traps or bottomless to a degree as well, are some things to consider there, because we just expect that monster disruption to likely carry our Secutor to the next turn so that we're able to attack again and get extra value out of the Secutor. So those are some very important things to consider, is like, can I appropriately defend this to where I can somewhat expect to get another set off of Secutor? And again, part of the reason I love this is just because of the threat. Your opponent is going to be feeling the need to take care of this. So if you end the board with Secutor on board, they feel the need to take care of it now, because if they don't, they know it's going to just continue to kind of snowball on them. And so keeping them there just means that they're going to have to be maybe more aggressive than they want to be, and let your cards do some extra work, some extra value. Another really common thing that we did talk about earlier is if we can put a Secutor next to a Herc with any reasonable protection, let's say in this case Wabaku and just Chariot, we're actually set. It's a very threatening thing, because we know we're not getting destroyed by monster effect because we have Chariot. We know they're not going to be able to heavy this away because we have Herc, and they're probably going to try to attempt to battle through Secutor, in which case we just go ahead and activate our Wabaku, get our tags in the middle of the turn, and probably just win the game. That's another good example, is can you make something side by side with him that helps with that protection? And in this case, Herc is probably the best example of that extra protection that we can have. The last thing I want to show is just an example of maybe how to be thinking on your opponent's turn if you do have that Wabaku. Say we decide to stay wide here. For whatever reason, we were like, you know what, we're not that worried about being in Herc, Heavy Storm. There are scenarios in which you're just not going to care as much. And we have these cards on the field. We have Wabaku and Chariot. Now, let's say they go like Sirocco, Special Summon Bora, and that's what they're going to do. And they're going to try to attack with two monsters to get over some of the stuff that you have. There's a really good chance, I think the better players first are going to attack something that's not Secutor. So let's say they attack our Bestiari. I'm just going to let that happen. Whatever it is, so let's say it's Sirocco over Bestiari and I take 500 damage. Sure, that's fine. I don't really care. I still have plenty of ways to like take care of that. And then a lot of times what they're going to do is, with that attack number 2, is attack into your Secutor. The worst players are probably going to go Secutor first, to be honest. But even the good players are going to still see, hey, we have to take our shot taking Secutor out, because if we don't, we're kind of fucked. And so in that case, I might hold this Wabaku until they actually attack the Secutor, because what's going to happen is I'm getting 2 tags on their turn instead of just the one that maybe Bestiari would have gotten. And in this case, I'm probably going to like Almarmillo a Sirocco or the Bora, and then I'll get my Bestiari back to hand, and I'll be ready to go, maybe probably instantly into Herc, and then summon Bestiari, attack for game. So it's just another thing to think about, like how to use Secutor and maybe that Wabaku type interaction on your opponent's turn to get the most value out of some of those scenarios. So I hope this was valuable to talk about Secutor, a sometimes controversial GB in the deck that I think is just beyond broken and too valuable not to include. And also just talk about some of the ways to really take advantage of what Secutor can bring to the deck when you use it the correct way, and kind of maximize what it can do. So I hope you enjoy this and continue watching the Breaking Glad series.